Thank you. We're going to start off with an activity.
If your birthday falls between January 1st and March 1st, please stand. If you are unable to stand, please raise your hand. This represents the number of transgender students who leave school from kindergarten to 12th grade due to harassment. The number is 1 in 6. Thank you. Please remain standing or keep your arm raised.
If your birthday falls between January 1st and May 30th, please stand or raise your hand. This represents the number of transgender students who attempt suicide by the time they are 21 years old. This number is 41%.
If your birthday falls between January 1st and August 22nd, please stand or raise your hand. This represents the number of transgender women who are raped. The number is 64%. Thank you. Please remain standing.
If your birthday falls between January 1st and November 25th, please stand or raise your hand. This represents the number of transgender students who report feeling unsafe at school because of their gender identity. This number is 90%. Please take a look around you. Thank you. You may sit down now.
Current dialogue about the LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer community is centered around marriage equality and adoption rights. Oftentimes the T in LGBTQ is unmentioned or forgotten. Today we are here to shed light on issues concerning transgender individuals, as we are marginalized not only in larger society, but within the queer community as well. We face issues in a variety of places, from the courthouse to the classroom.
Sorry. I used to be a 4.0 student. I always participated in class, and I loved to learn. As I began to look around my classes, however, I realized that I had identities and experiences that no one else in that class shared. I'm sure everyone in here has, at some point, looked around a classroom or just a setting and looked to see if anyone else like them was in it. And for me, I was much more often than not, I was the only trans student. And this seems small, but after a while, it really gets to you. For me, it was very isolating. When something offensive is said about trans people, it is up to you, as the only trans person, to stand and correct. And sometimes you just don't want to correct, or you can't. So you have to sit there in silence, as your community is being degraded, or even yourself. And so in classes where I was the only trans student, I did much worse. And I began to fear and I began to hate school. And there's no talk about transgender people in mainstream society. So that is why I stand here and I speak today.
Because there's very little discussion on transgender people in society, we would like to start out with some basic terminology. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the terminology that we are going to use, it differs between communities of people. Also, Sean and I are not representative of all transgender people, so please keep that in mind. Before we begin to discuss what transgender means, I'd like to make a distinction between sex and gender. In our society, we like to put things in boxes. For example, when we think of sex, we like to think of male and female. We categorize sex using genitalia, such as penises and vaginas, hormones, chromosomes, such as XY and XX, hormone levels, mainly testosterone and estrogen, and secondary sex characteristics, such as facial hair and breasts and larger hips. However, not everyone has characteristics that align as shown. I'd like you to meet Janelle. Janelle is a graphic designer, and in her spare time, she likes to knit sweaters for her nieces and nephews. Janelle has a vagina, has XX chromosomes, has a higher level of estrogen, which leads to breasts and larger hips. Janelle is categorized by society as female. Now I'd like you to meet Janelle's friend Danny. Danny is a senior in college and is a member of the hiking club. Danny has ambiguous genitalia, XXY chromosomes, a higher level of estrogen, which leads to the development of breasts. Danny is intersex. People who do not fall into the male or female categorizations are referred to as intersex. To review, sex is categorized using genitalia, chromosomes, hormone levels, and bodily features. Now, I'd like to introduce the concept of sex identity. Sex identity is someone's own personal feelings about their sex characteristics on their body. Everyone has a sex identity. For example, Janelle has a vagina. She also feels like she should have a vagina. She is categorized as female and self-identifies as female. However, not everyone has a sex identity and sex characteristics that align. For example, Aaron. Aaron is a member of the jazz band and has a little brother that likes to steal his clothing. Aaron is categorized as female by society, like Janelle, meaning Aaron has a vagina. However, Aaron has the feeling that he should have a penis. This is comparable to phantom limb syndrome, which is when someone loses a limb but still has the experience of that limb being attached to their body. Many transgender people feel this with genitalia that they do not possess. Aaron self-identifies as male. Aaron is referred to as transsexual. People whose sex identity does not match their sex characteristics are referred to as transsexual, like Aaron. You may have heard this word before as an insult against someone. However, many people in this world do identify as transsexual, and therefore it should not be used as a pejorative. People whose sex identity does match their sex, like Janelle, are referred to as cissexual. To recap, people who do not fall into the male or female categorizations are referred to as intersex. People whose sex identity does not match the sex characteristics on their body, like Aaron, are referred to as transsexual. People whose sex characteristics do match their sex identity, like Janelle, are referred to as cissexual.
So gender, unlike sex, is not biological. You cannot tell someone's gender just by looking at their body. It's not chromosomes or hormones or genitalia. Instead, gender is everything from the roles we assign, such as girls are supposed to like pink and boys are supposed to play with trucks, to the way people express themselves through dress and mannerisms, such as girls are feminine and boys are masculine, to even life ambitions, such as women do help, like the cleaning and cooking and aspire to motherhood, and men are expected to do the manual labor, enjoy physical activities, and be providers. Now, gender identity is everything that you take from the wider concept of gender and then apply to yourself. So everyone has a gender identity. Someone whose gender identity aligns with the gender that they were assigned at birth, so when the doctor said, oh, it's a boy or it's a girl, are called cisgender. Someone whose gender identity does not align with the gender that they were assigned at birth are called transgender. So remember Janelle? Janelle was assigned and raised as a girl at birth. She also self-identifies as a woman. This makes Janelle cisgender. Now, Aaron was also raised as a girl, but he does not identify as a girl. In fact, he identifies as a boy. So this makes Aaron transgender. Now, let's go to Danny. Danny was raised as a boy, but Danny doesn't feel like a boy. Danny also doesn't feel like a girl. Danny, I feel, somewhat in between the two. Danny actually identifies as genderqueer, which falls under the transgender umbrella. So gender is a spectrum. In Western society, we like to think of there being only two genders, man and woman. In other societies and cultures, that's not the case. So transgender people face a variety of issues in a lot of levels. And sorry. Sorry, skipped on. So Danny identified as genderqueer. So just to recap, gender is not biological, but rather all the kind of mannerisms and categories that we categorize together. And everyone has a gender identity. And the gender identity, if your gender identity aligns with the gender that you were assigned, that's called cisgender. And if the gender identity does not align with the gender that you personally identify, that's called transgender. And just to remember, in addition, that not everyone identifies as a man or a woman. So, as we discussed before, the high murder rate, sexual assault rate, harassment rate of trans people, we also face as a community more subtle ways of oppression. So, if you can imagine, if these are your only two options. Now, for bathrooms, Some people in this room might feel like, okay, that's fine for me, and obviously other people would definitely feel uncomfortable or unsafe or just feel like neither option fits them. Well, transgender people face this issue every day. For some, it's an issue of physical safety. Transgender people are often verbally, physically, and even sexually harassed in bathrooms. Not only does this cause emotional stress, but it can also lead to long-term health problems. I've had friends who just rather than going to a bathroom feel so unsafe using bathrooms that they just choose not to.
However, this problem has a very simple solution: gender-neutral bathrooms. Gender-neutral bathrooms are multi-stall or single bathrooms that are not designated specifically male or female or men and women. Administrators and bosses, if you notice that your workplace doesn't have a gender-neutral restroom, consider designating a current one as such. In addition to bathrooms, another subtle problem transgender people face is being misgendered. A question we often ask ourselves is that person a boy or a girl? To move out of this binary mindset and create a safer space for transgender people, you can instead introduce yourself to new people with your preferred gender pronouns. For example, if I were meeting my friend Sean here for the first time, I would introduce myself as, hey, my name is Wei Wen, and I use he, him, and his pronouns. What about you?
Hi, my name is Sean, and I use they, them, and their pronouns, or sie, and here, and hers, which are gender-neutral pronouns.
Preferred gender pronouns are what I would use to refer to Sean as in place of their name. For instance, instead of saying Sean went to the bathroom, I would say they went to the bathroom, or sie went to the bathroom. In addition to pronouns, many transgender people choose to go by a name that is not the one they were given at birth, oftentimes because the name they were given at birth does not reflect their current gender identity. If you know someone's preferred name, that is the name you should refer to them by. If you don't, it's okay to ask, hey, what name do you go by? Never purposefully use a transgender person's birth name if you know they prefer to go by something else. Imagine if someone you know consistently called you by a name you didn't like. Although language seems like a simple thing to be upset over, the real issue here is one of basic respect. By using someone's name, you're acknowledging your respect for them.
So we chose to go over a few issues that are very easily solvable in interpersonal interactions and at your school or workplace. I would like to remember, though, that transgender people face a variety of issues that are much harsher. The only time that transgender people get to meet and be a community is during a mass funeral, Transgender Day of Remembrance. We face unbelievably high rates of violence and extreme rates of poverty. So I really do encourage everyone to look into these issues further.
I'd like to leave you with the idea that if you are already a bystander to violence and discrimination, you are enabling it to continue. Many in the audience would be shocked to hear that the majority of my friends who are transgender have experienced harassment, either verbal, physical, or sexual. However, if you are transgender, you know this to be true and probably have stories of your own. It's important to remember that transgender people cannot fight this fight alone. Cisgender people cannot fight this fight alone. The battlefield is not always in the courthouse or in the news, but right here in our everyday interactions and in our mindsets.
While everyone's experience is unique, I would like to leave you with the words of Martin Luther King Jr. In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Thank you.